And Gage, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. I mean, a little tired, always a little tired, but I'm good.
As we all are in 2020, it seems.
Oh, definitely. God. And so we've got the two kids that keep me up and the five dogs, so I'm just writing in the middle of everything.
Impressive. That is impressive to keep the focus in the middle of in the midst of all the chaos.
Oh God, it's not always easy. They wake me up early enough though, where I can usually hide away for about 10 minutes in the morning and just puke something out. I'm like, all right, I'll fix it later. It's cool.
It seems to be how it goes. So, getting on to your writing, uh, this month you wrote The Tower of Many for us. What would be your like inside cover, back of the book, just quick little spiel about yourself or your poem or whatever you want to say?
Well, with the Tower of Many, it was actually because I know I sent like a whole pile of crap into the void, mainly all poems. Um, it was kind of funny that that one got picked to me because that one was actually an old one that I went back and edited, and it was written in like middle school. So I think it was 2010 probably, and I actually had a picture that I had with it, and I lost the picture, and I found only the first stanza, um, and I had actually for a while gone away from alliterations and rhyming and everything. So that one I actually threw in there at the last minute because I was like, oh, I found it. I'll finish it off and throw it in there. So it was actually kind of cool that one got picked, I guess, because it wasn't one that I really expected to. Uh, but it was from actually a pretty long time ago, and I cleaned it up a little bit. But yeah, I've been writing since forever. I mean, when I went to school and had to do the reading stuff, they ordered me books from other schools because they would like run out or whatever. And I ended up going towards the Greek epics and poems and everything. Really stuck with me, and so I went straight to poetry. But it was like in that old epic style where it didn't really rhyme, and it was a story, and it was weird as shit, but people loved it. So I would share it, and they're like, I don't understand any of it, but it's great. So I would just keep going with that. And I think that Tower of Many was probably the first one I broke away from that kind of extravagant story style because the story ones were long, like insanely long. And I was like, I'm not sending that in. So yeah, it was. I was like, oh, it's kind of a special one because it was the first one that veered towards a shorter style, a little more vague, and a lot less metaphorical. Like the older ones were stories about all these wars and shit. And they're like, what's this? I'm like, I don't even know anymore. I wrote it 10 years ago and I'm reading it and I'm like, oh my God. So I don't know. But yeah, the Tower of Many was a little bit special. Um, and I think everything I sent into the void was from unpublished, like poetry manuscripts that I just never sent off anywhere. So I have a lot of those on reserve that I just, because I was like, I like poetry, but a lot of people don't. So selling it's not easy. So
Yeah, it is. It's definitely it's like a, sadly, honestly, I think it's like a dying art form, or it's much harder. Right? We
really,
don't see a lot of like new poetry, like editions or whatever coming out from like new
yeah,
poets, like not nearly as frequently as like it obviously like used to be, right? In
yeah,
the heyday of like
exactly.
these like Shelley and all them, right? But it's definitely,
Right,
I think we're losing. It's like it's a sad because it's a different form than like prose or literature in that way, and it adds something. Like there's just different things you can do with it and different ways to speak,
right.
and it's great to see someone that is so talented and dedicated to like the poem, and it's just it's exciting.
I know I started using a lot of, well, everyone likes to play with wordplay that does poetry, but I like playing with not just the grammar, but the punctuation stuff, because I don't see that very much at all. There's never really any semicolons or dashes, and if there's a period, it's like every line's a period. So I try to switch it up with that a little bit, which I think does confuse some people. That's usually the complaint I get. Is just like, well, what does this mean here? I'm like, read it together, just squish it together. But yeah, poetry is definitely something that it's almost exclusively kept for the academic stuff. So it's all the old literature for academic purposes only. Which I mean, the old literature is what inspired me, but you don't really get a whole poetry volume from new authors as a whole set. You get a collection of random authors thrown together because it's hard to get a following with that alone. Um, I was able to luckily take a lot of my old story poems, and that's what's formed into my novels and stories and progress and stuff. So I'm able to keep it alive in that way. But now the poetry is mainly just for me. Because I know that I shared on my Facebook, and I'm like, I know you're not going to look at it, but here you go.
Well, we're glad you shared it with us over here at the Void. It, I guess so you talked about these, like the your inspiration kind of started in the epics and like these ancient Greek like poems, I'm assuming, like Homer and Milton and that kind of stuff. And I definitely see the echoes of that in the Tower of Many, because it reads as it's a coherent story almost, right? There's like development in the piece, which is something that like is definitely not a prerequisite for all poems, right? Like there's lots of poems that are like, here's a description of like a scene or something, but there's nothing like, there's no movement, there's no like forward progress of a story almost. So I guess I was wondering, to dig deeper into the poem itself, what do you think, if you can say, and I know you said you wrote it like a long time ago, but what do you think was your what else do you think was your inspiration for that poem specifically?
Well, for that one, I do think a lot. But I know I've had a bunch of like health issues and stuff in my life, so I know that I was kind of trying to, I guess, portray the way that I was seeing the world, the crumbling and the falling and everyone climbing on top of each other. So I mean, definitely like the political climate and the social issues and settings of America and everything. Definitely inspired, I guess, the need to want to write that. And I do know the old picture that came with it, which is something my Instagram did for a while. I would take pictures of like weeds, just ugly flowers that nobody liked and all this stuff, and would make a poem off that. And it was usually a story poem, had nothing to do with the picture at all. But I know the picture for that one was some kind of purple weed, and the pieces were stacked on top of each other, and the one was leaning all the way over, and when the wind blew, it would go back to the top. And I was like, well, so that definitely helped inspire at least the premise of that poem. But I mean, definitely a lot of my own outlooks on the social and economic situations in the world, but mainly in America, because it is how it seems to me that, you know, whether it be with just money or it be any stardom or height of anything, it's people climbing on top of each other, and there's some holding up and helping, but for the most part, when somebody on top falls down, they scramble right back up. They don't help anybody else climb up. They don't care about the support. It's getting back to the top. So it definitely came from that, at least after the fact. Usually when I'm writing the poem out, I'm just following the story, and then I get to the end, I'm like, oh, there we go. That's what this was all for. The same way I draw, I just start random lines and then piece it together. I'm like, look, there it is. There's the picture. If I go into it with too much forethought, it ends up being extremely long. So I do, but definitely the picture and the lifestyle, I guess, that I had going on at the time. But yes, I know at some point I had highlighted stuff about like the aggressive assaults and all that, and at the time I didn't know it, but I had kind of an autoimmune issue that had been going on that sparked anxiety and all this other stuff. And so that kind of verbiage and uses is common through a lot of my old poems, which is cool to me because at the time I had no idea. They were just like, oh, we think it's just anxiety. You're good. Go and take this and go on. And it ended up being like 10 years of mixed diagnosis. So going back and reading that stuff, that's at least some kind of subconscious inspiration for it, because I felt that way in some way. Because, I mean, it just came out of nowhere when I found out about it. But going back and reading all the poetry, I was like, oh my God, I guess some part of me knew something, because I just all over the place. The assaults, the crumbling, falling apart. I was like, it's about the outside stuff, but all my poems also reflect, at least metaphorically, back into how I feel at the time, because I don't express that stuff very great otherwise. So I had it in the little poems. But yeah, definitely the lifestyle. Oh my God.
Of course. I think you touched on something that I found super interesting right there. And this is kind of veering off from the poem itself, but this kind of mentioned that right, the Tower of Many is this kind of it's an externalization, right? It seems like a societal critique, right? It's kind of like this like metaphorical representation of like American social structure, Western culture, or something like that, right? But there's also this, what you just touched on right there was that it's also a deep, like, a reflection of you and kind of like your personal feelings and your the things you were struggling with personally. And I think that's an interesting thing that I find that interesting in kind of all literature, because it's kind of an impossible line. Like there's no one really writes a piece of literature that is purely a critique of something. Even if we're trying to make a broader social cultural point, it's always reflective of us and like what we're experiencing and like these internal struggles that we're having or whatever, right? Like yeah, like you're and this is nothing to like draw a comparison with what you were going through or anything like that, but like, right, like if you're, for a silly example, if you're going through a divorce, but like writing this piece about whatever, right, like UBI or something, like you're gonna put those kind of things into your art, because that's just kind of a fact of that. So that was a long diatribe, I'm sorry, but like I guess it was great, it was super interesting. So I guess my question would be, do you have your thoughts changed, like as you like grew older and developed and I don't know if you've moved past these health issues or
right.
but like has that developed your like have your thoughts on the Tower of Many and like kind of those views expressed in that changed, or have they stayed the same, or have they taken on a different tone or something, I guess would be my question.
Yeah, they've definitely, I guess, shifted. It's still the same general kind of feelings towards all of it, but especially with the health issues and all that, I've definitely accepted it as more of a part of me that's not trying to take me down. With the societal stuff, it seems almost worse now, looking out there. But you also see the indications of it going the opposite way, with people helping each other out a little bit more because we can. So that is nice, but for the most part, it stays about the same. I did have, after the health issues got diagnosed, it had a lot to do with calcium, and those have leveled out. But there's still a bunch of stuff that kind of side effects and offshoots of the original issue. But it definitely, going through it and reading back, I can see where I'm like, I don't really feel like it's that heinous of an atmosphere for me on a personal level anymore. But outwardly, it still seems like there's a lot of angst and anxiety, at least everywhere and around me. But it's definitely softened a little bit since then, I suppose.
Sure, of course. And I guess we'll just dive, if you want, we can dive right into kind of the society and kind of what like what that is, and I what I found so what I liked so much about the Tower of Many was that there was a note, and maybe I'm like reading this onto the poem itself, because like I want there to be a hopeful note, but I almost read it as like there's this silver lining in that, if right, there's all these people in there, and we're constantly like climbing over each other and just stepping on like the heads of our fellow like countrymen and our neighbors and stuff, just to try to get ahead, and it's kind of this like rat race culture that it's everyone versus everyone else, right, all the time. And it's just whoever can get to the top, with like no regards of who you knock off on your way or who's like helping you up or anything like that. But I thought what was hopeful about the poem was that there is this kind of tinge of, if we could just like take a second and like stop and look at like the people that have helped us, and just kind of like put out a hand to like our fellow man or woman or whatever, like it could be just like instantaneously almost so much better, right? Like and I guess I don't know if you think, I don't know if you think am I reading that into the poem? Is that, would you agree with that statement, or what do you think?
I would agree with it, especially because, I mean, I know some of my old stuff is like super like dark and deep, and I've always tried, if I go back and find a little piece to redo, to add in a little bit of light or hope at the end, mainly because for the most part I've gotten kind of out of those mindsets of trying to keep it all negative. I try to look at every perspective. I always have. But for whatever reason, before, the negative perspective was a lot easier to express. But definitely has that feeling of the hope in there, especially like I think at the end to talk about, if it just requires the bodies of the many to know what to do. You have to know how to help each other and support each other. And of course, that always comes back to feeling like you're a good person yourself and loving yourself before you can help other people. But it definitely, I did try to throw a little bit of a note in there that we can fix that and we can stop that kind of cycle. That's just, it's going to take work and take everyone doing it together. Which the main issue with that becomes people being kept apart by their own societal issues and biases and the economic divides and everything. But it's not things that are impossible. It's just things that aren't going to be easy to do. Well, you're bringing in your shoes. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely right. It is both you touch on both the need for it, but without this naivete or like that it's going to be easy, right? Like we kind of hear that in what you said is like this ability to take both sides and kind of see the like get a more fully fledged picture of the situation, right? We kind of see that a lot from, or at least I do, in a lot of the more idealist people that are like younger and of my generation are coming up and is like, well, if we just did X, Y, and Z, right? Like there are quick fix changes that we could bring around and it would like fix everything and everything would like snap into place and everyone would have like a great life. And I just really, I love that you take the time to really consider how difficult it truly like is going to be. Even though like it seems entirely necessary because this like rat race that we're all stuck in it's not sustainable, right?
Right, exactly. We're out of fumes eventually.
Exactly. So I guess to push you, and I know you just said it's extremely difficult, but what do you think the best path forward is? Like if you, on an individual level, or if you were king of the world and you could wave a magic wand, if you could bring about this like idealist young person, like utopia, whatever they think they can create, what would yours be? What do you think the path forward is for us?
Well, the basis would be just trying to be a little more, understanding and compassion, because that's where it all starts, with trying to get away from just yourself and block away your emotions a little bit. Like, don't be emotionless because you need the emotion to fully empathize and understand. But try to make it a little more selfless, because just adopting those views or philosophies that are more selfless or more, I guess selfless is the word I was looking for. A lot of people like higher up, upper crust stuff, they are raised in kind of a different world, and it doesn't make them automatically like a bad person. But some of the way that world raises them is usually a little negligent to the people below them or elsewhere. So I think a big point would be to try and make it a lot less divided on the economic level, because in like racially and everything, we've got a lot of issues in America, but they bleed into the economic issues. Everything kind of mixes together, and if you can start with changing the way that we talk about and perceive each other as groups, it helps to alleviate some of that tension and the biases and cause a little bit more of a positive outlook, as these are just other people. And individually, that does take some work on everybody's part. I know I had, I don't know, I think it was part of whatever had gone on before, but I used to have huge issues with people that were like very repetitious. It wasn't even like a group of very like actual people. If someone was very repetitious, I would get angry, and I was like, "Why is that? Why does this happen?" And going back and looking, it was issues that I had in my past with my own biological father. I hated when I repeated myself, so I stopped doing it. And so that kind of bled over into that. And then once I fixed that, it was easier for me to say, okay, this person's repeating this part over and over, repeating themselves, either because they didn't understand or have the answer they were looking for, and they don't know how else to ask for it, or the one they got just wasn't good enough, and that's fine. I shouldn't be angry at the fact that they want something more out of it. So that definitely was a good thing to work through before I had the kids. But overall, it would be kind of just getting everyone to stop and not emotionally react to everything, which is hard. It's not
Sure.
something that
For
is
sure.
just you can just do it, but it is easier when you have help and you see other people doing it. And we've seen instances of that with the groups of protesters and everything in America that have been, it's a huge hodgepodge of people. Everybody's there, trying to help each other and stand up for what we believe is right and just. And then, of course, you've got the people that make the laws and everything. Everyone wants to say, oh, they're evil because they don't want to change it or they want to do this. And then you have to look at, well, when they go to look at changing this law, it takes 10 years to do this, it takes this to do that. And I'm like, of course, there's issues where you can shortcut and streamline a little bit, but you'd have to strategically piece apart the structures we have there already. So it's either, because if you do a full upheaval and break everything down at once, we're screwed. Like we've shown we can't organize extremely well for long periods of time without very, very strong influences. And even then, we seem to fall apart a little bit. There's always subgroups that are trying to infiltrate and knock things over for everybody else. But overall, do you think it would just be a little more focus on emotional intelligence and compassion, especially in the American educational system, instead of just testing?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. There's so much there. There's so much I wanna dive into. I guess to try to get my thoughts in order, I'll just kind of like try to reiterate all that because I think it was super valuable. Right? It's this focus on compassion and understanding, as you said, which are kind of like these cliche terms, but like a difficult and deep kind of understanding, right? And it starts with what I loved what you said was it almost has to start with a self-reflection and compassion and understanding of yourself in order to be able to externalize this like to the world, right? You have to understand, right? Like you have to be like, I'm also fallible. Where are my mistakes? But like not in a hateful way, right? Not like, oh, I hate myself because I can't do this or that. Like, and like work on that. And then I think when that broaderly, then you were able to generalize that to like a societal level, which was like, there's this need to just be able to empathize with people as if they like are also human. And we kind of see that on both sides, right? Like you have the elite or whoever with like Bezos and people with lots of wealth, right? We're asking them to empathize with people that like don't have that, and we're not able to do that and didn't win, right? And weren't born into the best family and had all these struggles and stuff. But we're also asking, right? But like it's a give and take, right? Because if you're asking them to do that, you also have to be able to do that like yourself, right? Like so we have to ask the protesters and these demonstrators, like think like you actually don't just demonize the people that like don't immediately give in to everything you're saying, right? Like consider, right? The governmental system is built to be slow, and there are things that you have to do, and it takes time, and there we can't just tear the system down because like that has a bunch of negative consequences as well that like we're not really thinking about. And and you have to think about like even someone who is super rich, right? Even someone who's born into like a wealthy family and has a trust fund, if they were right, they're also a product of their environment in a lot of ways. And if they were raised kind of with this view of like everything you have is entirely deserved and like you don't need to give back and it's not worth it, right? Like that's not entirely their fault either, that they're not able to like get past that that like paradigm. So I just loved, I think that was all just reiteration of what you said, but I just loved all of that. And I think it makes me deep. Like I love these conversations with people because it makes me, it reaffirms my faith in the American system and like the human system more broadly, because there are so many people that are just willing to think critically and nuanced about these issues, like you and like all these other people that I've been able to talk to through this. So I love that. And then you said something at the end that I wanted to ask about. Oh, the educational system. I think that is one of the most overlooked issues right now. It's is like what is happening that we're not producing people that we like want to be producing, and like the thing that like is in charge of creating human beings is the educational system. So I guess my question to you would be, what do you think and I know this is a crazy broad question, but like what do you think the biggest problems in the educational system are, and like how do we start to go about fixing those?
Yeah, well, it kind of goes back to the individual kind of view. Is there's no individual learning. It's like, okay, so you're all going to have 25 people in this class. and you're going to learn the same thing. And these 10 kids suck at it, so they get bad grades. And these 10 kids are good at it, so they get to have the good grades. Instead of being like, okay, so you suck at this main math problem, but the way you structured it here is interesting. Do it how you want to, and we'll see if we can work back around. If they suck at math, they suck at math. There's no reason to be like, oh, you're stupid. It should be able to be like, okay, so you're not good at this, but you can draw or you can sing or do whatever. So just let them focus on things that, for one, that they like, because that's going to develop more of a passion for it. I mean, in school, I was always ahead in the grades and all that, but it was super passionless. Other than for writing and reading, I couldn't have cared less about anything else going on. I loved history when I read it myself, but learning it in school, it was almost like an indoctrination because I could tell that some things were taken out or misplaced or made to look or seem less or more bad. And it was definitely, you can see the opinions of the creators of this education going in there. And then the huge focus on tests is ridiculous. Because after leaving school, you don't really get, every day is kind of a test, but you don't physically get a piece of paper put down in front of you and answer these questions. You have to figure out and solve problems that are always changing and forming differently. And they don't train the brain for that, I guess, in the way we have the educational system. It's very stagnant. And it doesn't, we talk about all the time, kids are sponges, they have malleable brains, and then we try to shove them into a certain shape, so to speak, that fits with, if you know this, you can be a good worker at a factory because you know how to do this basic math or that. And then there is a need for that kind of work and craftsmanship, but that's why we have trade schools and stuff. So we should be able to, I think, move kids around to these areas a little sooner than we do. Like we seem to think they're just stupid and they can't figure it out themselves. But like with my son, he picked up wanting to draw numbers and stuff on his own. And then, once we tried to work with him and he got to a point he got frustrated, he just wanted to draw. And I was like, well, just draw. And within like a day or two, he was drawing visibly recognizable cars and stuff. And I was like, oh, wow, I was like, it would have taken me months to even know you could do that if I had been like, oh, yeah, you're writing out to 10, write to 10. And so, that kind of solidified for me that it definitely needs to be more individual and a lot less of this kind of, to me, aggressive indoctrination that we want you to think this way. It needs to be, we want you to think. You need to know how to work through these things yourself because you're going to have to do it on your own one day. And then if you're going to have anything near the same system we have right now, they have to integrate more courses on how to live in our society. Like, okay, if you want to do a business, you got to fill out a loan. This is how you do your checkbook. This is how you do this budget. And I do like half-ass versions of that in schools now. So like, we're going to take your social studies class away for a day. You're going to learn to write a check. And I'm like, that doesn't show the implications of that's your money going away. What do you do after? And that's one of the biggest problems that we've got in our society right now is money management. The people that know how to do it keep doing it for themselves. And the people that don't know how to do it are just screwed.
Absolutely. Right. Again, so much that was great in there, but to just pick up off that last point, about the the biggest complaint, at least I very recently went through the public school system and through high school and stuff. And so it's all quite fresh, but, it like the biggest complaint you hear from, at least I heard from students at my high school is like, when am I ever going to need to take a derivative, right? Like I'm sitting in calc 1 class or whatever senior year. And it's like, I'm about to like leave school and like, maybe I go to college, maybe I don't, right? Not everyone, only like 50% or something or lower actually attend college or whatever. So it's like, this is possibly the last time I'm ever going to sit in like a structured learning environment like this. And you're choosing to like spend that time teaching me how to do like high level math that like only like a fraction of a percentage of people sitting in this room are actually ever going to use again, right? Like the like handful of people that go on to like get an engineering degree or get a pure math degree and become a professor, right? But that's like not the vast majority of people. And like you could be teaching people practical skills that everyone's going to use, right? It's like how do I manage my checkbook? How do you balance money? How do you invest money into the stock market, right? Why does the stock market work the way it does? Like how do you diversify your investment portfolio, right? 401ks and all this stuff that's super important that everyone basically just has to learn on the fly because you spent the first 18 years of your life learning how to like, right? Like do long division and well, it's just like useful, but like It's all you learned, right? You memorize history dates, right? Like,
Exactly.
like the date that World War II started and like the date that it ended, but like you don't know how to write a check or right, like anything like
Right.
that. So it's like I feel like we missed the boat there a little bit on like what we prioritize teaching you.
Because that stuff,
Um,
especially with the history, that's stuff you can learn later on your own. If you're interested in it, go for it, dive into it. But you got to know how to survive to
yeah,
get to that point.
of course,
Oh,
and there's this focus on interest, which I love. Is it's as if we built a system that like is designed to crush your personal interest in
oh yeah.
anything, right?
Oh
Like
yeah.
if you right, like it's a very small number of students who are able to have kind of the it's almost like a personal like wherewithal and strength almost to kind of rebel against the system and be like, you know what,
Mm,
I'm not gonna take
right.
the extra AP class or whatever if you're trying to get into a nice college or whatever this like whole structure is, and I'm gonna take like the art class because I love it, right?
Yeah,
And I'm gonna
exactly.
take the sculpture class that my school may or may not offer depending on where you are, that because I love it, right? Like,
Right.
and it's like I don't think right. It sucks that we've built a system that like only that like you have to be that kind of resilient person and like rebellious
Yeah.
spirit to do it because like right, all it does is generate an entire like cohort of people that like
Yeah, right.
think they hate learning, right? Like it's
Yeah,
like you don't hate learning, you hate learning like in a shitty way. Of course you
exactly.
hate that. Like you should hate that.
Everybody hates
Yeah.
that. God, I know, and they always got me because when I was in high school, I had like all the AP classes and everything, and they're like, "Oh, so you really like school?" I'm like, "No, I fucking hate it. It's awful." I'm like, "But I do good because I was taught to do well, and I just stuck with that. That stuck with me, and it helped that having a basis in like reading and whatever language you're native and learning in, reading any of the literature, having that basis helps you with everything. If you know any of the English language, that means you know some Latin, which means you know a lot of the terminology for bigger scientific terms and deeper communities. At least you can work to that on your own. But they'd always assumed that I just like, oh, you love it because you got these good grades. I'm like, no, it's awful. And I see everyone else. We got to the point where I didn't have to try, so I stopped trying. And then after I got done with it, I was like, well, now what? And I was like, now I don't want to do anything because that's what I spent the past 5 years doing was nothing.
Yeah, of course, right? Like yeah, I totally I had a very similar experience, right? Like right, my family like preached like you got to get good grades because you got to get to like the good college and you get a good job and you like have a stable life, and it's like there's like but what you kind of realize is like it's a never ending chain of like doing stuff that you don't like to get to this like
Exactly.
forever moving goalpost of like the thing that you will eventually like if you just trust us, like it will be good, but like it never really like pays off that way.
Yeah,
Like kind
right.
of what you realize is you're like, oh, right, like the actual way to like enjoy life or like enjoy learning and things like that is to kind of reject this entire like way of doing
Yeah.
it, right? It's not a chore. You have to do the things that you love. You have to like spend time on the things that you're passionate about, and if you love to read whatever, right, like
Right,
epic
right.
Greek poems, that's what you should read, right? Like
Right,
and
exactly.
if you like are in love with science for the sake of science, that's what you should do, right? But like not it's not
Yeah.
not everyone loves the same thing,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
Yeah, especially now that we have all these. I mean, public schools are crammed, and I mean, some private schools are getting to that point where they have so many students, and I'm like, when you're trying to force all this stuff on so many people, it's not going to stick with a lot of them. For one, even probability-wise, you're looking at a good, at least tenth of the people that went to your school are going to go out there and do something awful because they're angry and never found anything they enjoyed or had fun looking at. Come on, get out of my leg. Go on, baby. Thank you. Um, but and there's a bunch of people from Russell, like they all went and they're like, oh, now I work at Ford. Ford's a good warehouse job. I'm like, yeah, but you tell me how much you hate it all the time. You hate being in there. It's dirty. It's stressful. And I'm like, well, then you shouldn't have to stick with that. But because no one taught you how to explore the options you enjoy, you're just at a loss, which I struggled with a lot. I had a bunch of anxiety, so I kind of fell off writing and everything. I stopped writing online. I was just flailing. I was like, what am I going to grab onto now? I don't have to write anymore. And I mean, it was all anxiety and kind of depression and stuff. But I was like, okay, well, I've always liked music, and I've had, it was a perfect pitch in high school. I could do something with music production. But I had no idea how to get started on doing it. And by the time I had found out how to get into it, it was like, well, you should have started this 5 years ago, whenever you were doing that. I'm like, God. So, but eventually after I got everything, I was like, okay, it's still writing. I still have the most fun when I'm writing. But it's definitely, and that's an issue too, is once someone does find something they're good at, in our current system, it's like, okay, that's all you do. That's it. Go do that. Don't try anything else. Don't challenge yourself. Because for a while, I only wrote and I never drew anything. I used to love drawing up until like this past year, and I started drawing again. And I was like, oh, okay, so I've learned how to get past these challenges that before people, I just don't do it. Just keep writing because you're good at it. And that made me hate a lot of my old writing. Nowadays, it's a little easier for me to go through and read my stuff. I'm like, okay, so this is actually okay. This is good. But it definitely kind of shatters people's identities a little bit. And I think I read something where it was like, okay, you like to write, you're not a writer because you don't just write, you write, you do art, you do all this. Well, you get out of here. Go on. I'll let you sit with me in a second, okay? Yeah. Gosh, you're heavy. There we go. But it definitely creates, I mean, I think that's one of the main issues we have right now with all the prevalency of what we deem mental illness, at least in our society, is you repress people for their entire school career, and then you're like, okay, now go out there and be what we beat you into. Of course, people are gonna snap.
Exactly.
I mean, it's super stressful. And it doesn't have to have everything else compounding on top of that. Don't tell them what they've got going on in their personal lives. And so I've always wanted to move towards a more, I don't know about like the Montessori learning. That stuff's cool because it's kind of, when they're younger, at least, it's they explore what they want to explore. They work on motor skills, this, that, and the other. And then you build off of what they have interest in. They're like, okay, I want to teach them math. Well, he likes construction trucks. So this construction truck, dump truck's going to move 5 things of boulders, and he'll count the boulders on his own because it's fun. And so the Montessori thing has a lot of good ideas with that, where it's a more natural curve of finding out who you are and what you like before you try to become an expert in anything. I mean, I know for the longest time, everyone's like, oh, you're great at writing, great at writing. I'm like, it stopped being a compliment after a little while, because that's all people said. I'm
Sure.
like, well, I also drew a picture for the cover. What about that? I know it's cool. Say something.
Of course, right? We do. We like we need people almost, right? Like the way we've constructed, like modern society, and like this isn't a denigration of modern society, right? Like without this kind of like building, like we don't have indoor plumbing and like
right.
iPhones and TV and like computers, and like we're not having this Zoom conversation like all
Right.
like from around the world. Like there's a bunch of benefits to this, but like one of the downsides is you kind of need to compress people into like singular cogs that do a singular function, and like all we really care about is whether or not you can complete your function, right? Like,
Yeah, right. Like,
and that's a yeah, exactly. And that's a deeply, like, anyone who's lived that life is like, that's a deeply unsatisfying life for a human being, right? Like
right.
I yeah, sure, like, and even if you like your job, right, which like I feel like most people probably don't, right? Like but like even if you're like, yeah, you know what, I work at Google or wherever, and like I kind of do the same thing every day, but like I enjoy kind of what I do, and like I have like meaning in that. But like even after a while, right, like I do that for 10 hours a day every day, and I come home and that's the only thing I do, and then I sleep and then I do it again, right? Like that's gonna break anybody, right? Like you're not built to do that.
I used to like coding, but now I fucking hate it because everybody made me do it. Yeah, it's like so I stopped writing online. I wrote online for a little bit for a it was like Louisville.com or something. It was just a local magazine for around where I live. It was for probably 5 or 6 months I was actively doing that. But then I got to the point where, for one, once you're in that kind of setting, you see how underappreciated some writing things are because they're just throwing it out there. Like, whoever's writing this, put it all together. And then I had issues where when they changed editors, I would go and the article would be about an interview with somebody on a band, and I would mention other bands. So there would be linked to it. And I'd send them a link, and lo and behold, they've taken those links out and done this without telling me anything. And so it got to where it was so stressful and irritating. Like I didn't want to write at all because they were just making it such a stoic thing. All right, it was like 300 words. You're gonna have this exact format, this link here, this that. And I'm like, and that's fine doing that every so often. But when that's the only writing I'm doing, I don't want to write anymore. That's just, it's constricting something. It's kind of taking something that people know you enjoy and purposely diverting it towards what's beneficial and profitable for them. Um, and like the company itself, they were great. They still produce great content. They're awesome, but it definitely was not for me, at least like a full-time thing, because it was such a structure. It just reminded me so much of the structure of the educational system. And I was like, it's about control, which I think a lot of our educational system right now is more about creating a controllable population or kids that we can control. Because why else would you make kids sit down for 8 hours a day? No kid can sit for 8 hours a day happily.
Exactly.
Like it extends into everything, outside of school and after school. Oh, you dropped it. Hold on. Okay. Oh God. There you go. You're welcome. But I mean, it really, I don't know. It definitely all stemmed from the fact that we aren't really treating each other as complete individuals. We don't understand how complex individuals we are. Because we do have general things that, there's going to be groups of kids that like math and science, but in those groups, there's kids that like them to a varying degree in different types. And one kid might like algebra and he hates calculus, and that's fine. He can go do whatever with algebra. But we get out of here. Jeez. But I mean, it definitely becomes a kind of, we've shattered people into a mold. Like we shattered them, molded them, and then when they want to kind of shake that off, they've got to do it on their own. Like you've got to uneducate
Absolutely.
yourself just to be re-educated about whatever's around you, which isn't always the best, because some places you have limited resources, or you find the wrong resources, and it's just stop it, get out of here. It's just a whole mess of people not wanting to actually think about it in depth, because it's easier to be like, we'll set all the kids in that one class for that hour. They're all there. They're all safe. We're fine. I'm like, but that kid's having a little breakdown in the back's not safe.
Right.
He hates his life, and you're directly pushing that further. And we don't have appropriate amounts of like counseling stuff in public schools, but we wouldn't need that counseling as much if we weren't purposely degrading the people
Right.
in the school. Like, no,
Absolutely.
you're dumb.
Yeah. Right. But to kind of tie this all the way back to kind of what we were discussing at the very, very beginning, there is this kind of, right, and this kind of breeds an entire resentment towards the system itself, right? And I think it points to a lot of the reasons why we see a bunch of these like young kind of protesters arguing to like just tear it all down, right? Burn the whole system down, which we kind of both agree is like that's probably not the best solution, but like you get kind of we can kind of trace where that resentment comes from, because like the system is all the system did for me, right? As like I didn't fit the mold, so it kind of like beat me down and forced me into this thing, and then ignored me, and then tried to tell me to be a cog in the machine, and like no, right? Like I'm just reject that wholesale. But again, like what we said at the beginning is like we do that at our own peril, because the system itself and structure itself does give us a lot of value, and like we can't run an entirely unstructured society, right? And like you can't just like the other kind of extreme is like we just kind of like let kids run about and like do what they will, and like that's also not a good solution. So I guess as we're getting close here, so I'll let you go in a second, but I guess one of my questions is what do you think the balance is, and how do we strike that kind of like nuanced balance between allowing kids to be individuals and allowing people to be like fully fledged individuals and respecting their humanity, but also the balance of like, yeah, we do need people to like bag the groceries and stuff the shelves and code the TV and like do the stuff, right? Like there are like repetitive kind of boring tasks that we need people to do, and so what do you think the balance is there?
I think the real balance comes with, and I notice other educational systems, and I guess there's like Denmark and Sweden and other countries, they kind of have it where it's approaching the right thing, where you go in and it's structured, but it's what you want to learn. It's individual, but then everybody does, like, I know in Japan, everybody cleans up at school. Everyone knows how to clean because they all clean it up someday at the end of the week. So it'd be things where it's structured, but it's not all that it is, where, okay, you might end up bagging groceries while you're doing art or writing or whatever. So we're going to teach you how to do the basic math that you might need and how to bag the damn groceries. And then everyone gets this small little segment class, and it gives you at least like a starting. That would help some people know, like, okay, that job's not for me because I hate being around people. I've learned that
Sure.
through this interaction, that I can't keep a straight face. And so then they know before they go in the workforce and get fired and get completely just dejected from the whole experience. So it's definitely like a individualism, but structured. I guess an analogy that I would use would be like you have open world video games, and then you have segmented open world video games where it throws you, like kind of like Mario, the newest Mario, when it throws you in and it's a huge open area, but it's still kind of got in the sense that there's boundaries. There's things you can't go on your own, or you would have to be like, okay, I'm ready for this step, so somebody could get you over that next part over there. So we need to be there to offer assistance without forcefully guiding, I guess. So we need to let back on the control a little bit, but still be there. It's really like, okay, so they're running around, make sure that kid doesn't fall off the wall over there, be there for that. But if he's sitting down playing with bugs, don't stop him.
Yeah.
Do it,
Absolutely, right. There's this balance between like, right, we got to put guardrails up at some point, right? Like you can't just like do whatever you want, and it's the same in society, right? Like you can't just like we have laws for reasons, right? You can't just you can't just like steal things, right? Like it's not that, like you're like, well, I'm like, that's what I wanted to do, and that's like makes me feel fulfilled, and you're like, okay, we gotta draw some lines here. And also this like idea that there are there's this building of community within the school, which I loved about that, like the Japanese school system that you described, right? It's like once a week we all clean up together, right? Even though we're kind of all doing our separate things, and we're kind of trying to allow everyone to like be an individual and what do you love and kind of build your own life and path or whatever. But like there's still this sense of bring it back together. We're all a community. We need to help each other. We need to be there for each other without like, and there's a way, and I think, at least I hope, there's a way to do that without being like, we make everyone the same. So therefore you're like, the community is, everyone is the same, but then everyone's unhappy. Right. So I think that's a great thing to strive for in a idea. Right? It's just great. It's like it would be infinitely better than I think the system that we currently have, right? Which definitely I would agree errs on the side of over conformity for the sake of like structure, but like over structure is just a problem as just as big of a problem as no structure at all.
Exactly.
So this has been absolutely great. I will let you go. We're getting close to our hour. But I do have to leave you. I do have to ask you one last question, which I call like the cliche of all cliche questions for interviewing writers, which is if you were talking to someone who like loves to read, what would be your like 3 to 5-ish books that are must reads?
Oh man. Okay.
Well, and I know it's a tough one. Put you on the spot.
So like I said, I love all the the Greek epics and stuff, and so like the Aeneid and the Odyssey, everyone's kind of found those at some point, at least heard about them or know somewhere of the story. And so I've always veered off towards like the Native American mythologies and the any mythos from anywhere and stories and poems from anywhere. They have what was it called? They have like they're shiny and they're new, but they're like collections of classic Norse and Japanese and Chinese, all these mythical tales and legends, and they offer a little bit of history in there. And I'm pretty sure it's literally just called, Norse Mythology Collection, and they're like half-price books and everything everywhere. So those are, I think, really good because other than exposing people to other cultures and different ideas, the writing and the thought processes back then were definitely different. And if you can read that and kind of get the understanding that, you can probably write out anything in a way someone's going to understand after working through some of it. Like, why are all these gods that are related sleeping with each other? And then you have to break down, okay, so this word actually means not family, but close to kinship. So they're really just close, but it translates and people reading it as it's family. And I'm like, oh, it's gross. They don't do that. But definitely those for the kind of, I guess, the educational mythology thing. Enjoyment-wise, I've always loved the Brent Weeks. He did the Night Angel trilogy, which is a fantasy kind of sci-fi saga, and the Lightbringer series. And those are good because he kind of, it's kind of that low fantasy. He kind of demystifies some of it a little bit. And I think that helps some people get into it because a lot of fantasy stuff, you get in there and you're like, oh my God, this is all lore and words I don't know, which I don't mind, but I know it turns a lot of people away, which sucks because the stories can be really good. So definitely that, to if someone wants to break into fantasy, he's a good one to start with. He can be a little crass for some people, I guess. I've heard complaints after recommending him that he cusses too much for some people. I was like, oh, to me, so I don't know. Um, and then, I mean, really, at least one book of poetry. Doesn't matter who it is. If you like it, if it's, it could be Woodworth or Dickinson, somebody you haven't heard, a collection. I have one that's just random poetry from Africa and um, like South Africa, Africa, and some other area in the middle of Africa. And they were amazing. Like I'd never heard anything like them because I hadn't heard of these concepts before. So anything that kind of breaks you out of your little comfort wall would be good to at least try to pick up and look at. And then I always go for a scientific read. It doesn't matter if it's about your body or space or whatever. Even if you don't understand it, just read through it to see what you can understand, see if it helps you understand yourself and your position a little better. Um, but yeah, anything that's going to open up people's eyes just a little bit to something you're not really aware of. Um, I say, and then like my wife reads totally different books than I do. Totally different books. They're all the Pisces and all this other. I'm like, okay, that's cool. I like the astrology part of that, so I'll delve into that a little bit. Um, so I mean, I know that's not really a great recommendation, but if you see someone reading something like I've never seen anything like that, read it. See if you can find a copy of it. I picked up a book that was a South African book about how he killed the gods. It was a whole story about just killing these gods that came down because he was part god. And I was like, that's awesome. I've never read any American story where it was like, we took all the mythos and we killed all of them. And it was in a completely normal city setting. And I was like, all right, cool. So, but yeah, definitely just keep your eye out. I mean, I always read everything. I've read some books that I didn't like. I got to the end of it. I'm like, I'm not reading the sequel to that, but I read the book and I was like, okay, there were parts I liked, which helped me as a writer, which comes from the, thing. And if you're not a writer though, no matter what you do, it could be a character in there that says something, you're like, holy crap. that's exactly what I thought, but I had no words for it.
Absolutely.
But yeah, definitely just recommend people branching out a little bit because I was stuck on sci-fi and fantasy forever and wouldn't read anything else. And then went through and read the entire Stephen King collection of novels in like 2 months because I was like, oh, I'll finally give Stephen King a chance. And I was like, holy crap, I love it. All right, let's go.
Absolutely. Awesome. That's a great list. It's not exactly, I love it. It's not exactly a recommendation, but I love it. There's so much value in just read what you're not used to reading, right? Like just explore. I love it. I think that's the value of literature, seeing different perspectives, gaining more knowledge, being able to do that. It's great. Gage, it's been a absolute pleasure talking to you. This has been great. I'm certain that we'll hopefully, if you can, have you on again at some point. And we hope to see more of your work in the Void in future editions. But again, thank you so much. Yeah, awesome.
You have a good one, man. It's great. Thank you.